This happened several years ago. I was working for a small medical supply company as the IT manager. Business was bad, and eventually the IT department had to downsize to just me. During this time, they brought in a new CFO that I had to report directly to. Let's call her Pam. Pam had zero knowledge of it and how things worked. Her motto was, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." PC/server life cycles didn't exist. We don't have to pay for licensing to keep our firewall updated. It's working just fine now. I went from having an annual budget to a wish list, which she would deny everything I asked for. The couple that owned the company were real pieces of shit too. One time we had a quarterly meeting and people were asking about how secure their jobs were. The owner said that nobody was getting laid off and that our jobs were all secure. This was at 5:00 p.m. on a Wednesday. The very next morning at 9:00, they laid off 6 people. At noon, one of the owners showed up to show off the Escalade that he had just purchased that morning. During the first 6 months that Pam was there, she started firing everyone that worked for the old CFO and replaced them with her friends and family. 3 of her bridesmaids from her wedding, a few years prior, got hired to replace those that she fired. I knew I was on borrowed time. After she had been there for 9 months, I was the only one left out of what was about a dozen people that worked for the old CFO. I knew my time was running out. I had been looking for work, but the 2009 crash just happened, and the job market in my area went south quickly. Sure enough, she called me into HR and blindsided me with an entirely trumped-up charge that she claimed happened the day before. I was working with the VP of sales on a project that entire day, so I had a witness. I asked to bring him in since my boss was lying and was told, "This is not about him, this is about you." Remember, kids, HR is there to protect the business, not do what is right or legal in some cases. Needless to say, I knew my days were numbered. The next morning, I get introduced to an IT expert who just happens to be Pam's 21-year-old nephew. He was to shadow me and evaluate everything that I did to see if we could streamline any processes. In other words, they wanted me to train him to do my job. I quickly learned that this kid had absolutely no knowledge of it. He's the kid people think is an IT expert because he can hook up a PlayStation to a TV. He didn't even know how to join a PC to a domain. So I knew what had to be done. The inventory, billing, and shipping and receiving were all run by scripts that I created on the server. They were all run using the domain admin account. I raised quite a fuss about giving him the domain admin account in front of Pam and him. I then loudly proclaimed that I was going to change the password to it, since you can't have people who don't work for the company to have admin access to our network. I was overruled and was told to give it to him. I complied, but I also showed him multiple times how to change passwords on the domain. I even had him write it down to make sure that he could do it. I really stressed the importance of changing the admin password and deleting his local account the second he is no longer consulting with us to him. I showed him a few things, but nothing in regards to what really made the company run. That day, there wasn't enough time in a year to bring this kid up to speed on how to run that place due to his complete ignorance of it. I come into work the next day, and sure enough, I was let go because her nephew had found my skills lacking in many areas. I collect my last paycheck and head home. The next morning, I get a call from the CFO and owners. Apparently, her nephew wasn't quite up to speed on everything we did there, and she was graciously offering to pay me my regular salary to come in as a consultant and get her nephew up to speed on the IT infrastructure. I told her that I was now an independent contractor, and if she wanted my services, I was going to charge her $200 per hour with a 250-hour minimum. At that point, she told me that she was going to call the police and have me arrested for what I did if I didn't come in and fix everything. My response was, "Just so we're clear, you fired me, replaced me with a completely unqualified idiot, and now you're threatening to call the cops on me if I don't come in and fix what he did. I'll hold. Please call the police and let me know what they said." She started cursing at me and hung up the phone. Turns out her nephew did actually learn something from me. He changed the admin password after I had left, the one that ran all the scripts for inventory, billing, shipping, and ordering. According to some of my coworkers, the place was dead in the water for several days until they could get a real consultant in to go through the documentation that I had created and fix the issue. The nephew was immediately fired and Pam was gone within a month. TLDR, don't try to replace me with your idiot nephew that isn't smart enough to not bring your entire business to a screeching halt. I took the final for an engineering class this morning. Usually 1 or 2 people will go to the bathroom during class. However, for totally unknown reasons, about half of the class needed to use the restroom during the exam. Obviously, a vast majority of them were looking up the answers on their phones. This irritated me, but I just stayed focused and barely finished since it was a hard exam. I remembered that there was one particular problem that was only barely related to the stuff we went over in class, where part A was fairly easy, but I had no idea how to do part B. I didn't fret over it too much though, since that part was only 5 points out of 100. Well, our professor, who was on the older side, and I would have thought was somewhat ignorant of technology, sent us an email just now explaining his diabolical plan to catch cheaters. Many of the students in this class use Check, a website that has answers to lots of homework questions if you're not familiar. To be fair, I have an account too, though I only used it for studying and checking homework solutions. Anyway, he explained that he was tired of people going to the bathroom and looking up answers on their phones, so he made the question I mentioned earlier as a trap. He purposely made part B impossible to solve, and about a month before the final, he got a TA with a Chegg account to ask the exact question, which was distinctly worded to be unique. He then created his own Chegg account and answered the question with a bullshit solution that seems right at first glance, but is actually fundamentally flawed and very unlikely that someone would make the same assumptions and mistakes independently. He said that out of 99 exams, 14 of them fell for the trap, and that everyone who had his wrong solution on their exam was given a 0 and reported to the university for violating the academic honor pledge they signed on the front. He also sent an email to all the other professors in our department giving them the list of cheaters. Edit. I forgot to mention he gave full credit on part B of the question to everyone else. Edit 2. Hi guys, I'm writing this 5 months after the initial post. I'm glad this post is getting attention again, and I'm once again receiving messages from people wanting to get in touch with the professor or students from the class. So now that this post has run its initial course, I'll burst everyone's bubble by admitting that I mostly made this story up. It's based on a real incident that happened in my department a couple years ago, but I wasn't in the class personally. I only heard about it third-hand from someone I didn't know that well. So while the general plot and end result of the story is true, I changed some details to keep the professor and school anonymous, and took creative liberty in writing it from a first-person viewpoint. Unfortunately, the part about my department letting students go to the bathroom during exams with their phones was true, and is still true to this day. And to my knowledge, the incident this is based on is the only time that a professor actually took a stand against this shitty policy. So yeah, I don't know the professor personally since the class he taught is not part of my program's curriculum. So I won't put anyone in touch with him or anyone else who knows about the real incident and could expose his identity. Before anyone reports this for being fake, I will once again stress that while I changed the details, the actual events played out in a similar way, and the real professor did in fact get his revenge on the cheaters. Since so many people assume this happened in the States, I just wanted to say that I'm from a small country in Europe. The laws and regulations here are different than in the States. We have a government agency here that has everything to do with registering companies, and they do keep track of who's who. If you are a serial startup guy who leaves nothing but burnt ashes behind you, you cannot do it here. You have to register the owner and members of the board of the company if there is one. If you have a prior history of failed companies or you've broken the law in some regard, you are blacklisted at that establishment. First post, so be gentle with me. I've worked as an independent contractor in the IT field for over 20 years, doing all manner of things from creating simple HTML sites to managing a big hotel's complete IT infrastructure. One of the many clients I had back in the day I was coding big-ish custom websites was a rental company. Now I had heard a lot of warnings about not working with this guy that owned it. He had a reputation that he was sharp as a tack, backstabbing and conniving. He was a lawyer after all. So I went into the partnership with that in mind. He wanted a new website for his renting gig, where people would list their home for rent. Renters would sign up and pay a subscription to the site, and he would get the whole lot. Nothing out of the ordinary there. So we make a pretty good deal on paper, we sign it, and I get started on the project. Coding everything in PHP goes well, but he demands suddenly that I show him progress only a week into the progress. He wants to see the website front now. This is just the tip of the iceberg. I tried explaining to him that the front-end work isn't scheduled to start until after 6 weeks of back-end programming, and that I only had pure code to show right now. The contract we signed clearly states this. He then gets on his high horse and demands that I put everything on hold to do the front-end first, design, and then program. I, being really young at the time and fairly naive, agreed to this without asking for it to be added to the contract as an addendum and start working on the design now. Now, the contract stated that I was given free rein of the design decisions as long as I maintained the same color scheme and used the same logo on the site. So I make a fast draft in Fireworks. This was back when it was a Macromedia product, before the Adobe acquisition. And within 2 days I show him. He's not impressed and demands a different direction, and sets up a list of demands. I, as always, aim to please the customer and do just what he wants. I design a new layout with his list of demands, but he doesn't like that either. That's how the next 3 months go. A never-ending circle where he is never happy with anything. Now, close to 4 months into the project, he demands to see a working showcase of the backend. I point out that he himself changed the order in how the project was being done and had demanded that I do the front-end design first instead of the backend as stated in the contract, which he now turns on me and says, "Yes, the contract we both signed says you will have a working backend to show me at the end of the month. If you don't honor that, I will have to take my business elsewhere and seek compensation for your lack of professionalism." Ugh, I now have 12 days to do a backend for the site. So I get a friend to help me, and we work tirelessly through a weekend, and I have a good base to work from in 9 days. Mind you, at this point he has only paid the security on the contract, about 5% of the total price, and has shielded himself from paying by hiding behind. Well, if you can't honor the contract, why should I? Finish XX work, and then I'll pay as per the contract. Remembering now all the warnings I had heard about this guy, I decide to add a special function to the code just to be safe. More on that later. So now it's the end of the month. We have a front-end design he is okay with, a back-end that has been finished to about 85% of what is required according to the contract, and I still have 1 month left to finish everything else. Time for show and tell. Since I was working on this development, I was running it on my own dev server and showed him this in a browser on his computer. I mentioned to him that since I only had 512 gigs upstream from the server, it might lag a little, but it wouldn't when it would be put on the productional server he has his website on at his hosting company. He says that's okay, and the demonstration goes on. As I'm showing him the site, both front-end and back-end, I can see he's immensely happy with it, although he would never say so out loud. He is trying to hide his smile that pops up regularly, and his eyes gleam with all the added ways he can now start making money from. Anyway, he now says that it's way too slow, this is wrong, that is wrong, blah blah blah. Client: I want you to put it up on my prod server and see how the speed is. Me: Oak, no problem. I can make that happen. Please pay 50% of the contract, and I'll get right on it. Ugh, I wait a few days, and then I get an email from him where he includes a forwarded message from the bank detailing a transaction from him to me to the amount of the 50% I asked for. So I push the system to his prod server so he can take a look at it, under beta.his-domain.told. I then send him an email stating that he can try the system with the supplied credentials. What he doesn't know is that I knew he had been fishing around for another programmer to do this project, to pick up from a lazy deadbeat who couldn't do anything right. So I knew he would most likely try to screw me. What I also suspected was that the email he sent me with the transaction proof was a fake, which it ended up being. Pro Revenge 1. Remember that small function I mentioned? Well, what it did was if user X, his user, tries to remove user Y, my admin, from the system without one setting being changed in the config first, the system will first delete and purge the database and then remove all the documents in the webroot. Well, not 5 minutes after he reads the email from me, he does just that. He tries to delete my admin user from the system to lock me out. Guess who has nothing of the project left? He does. Pro Revenge 2. Since it is considered forgery to spoof an email, especially from a bank, I sent the information to the authorities, and he goes under investigation by both the police and the bank lawyers. Pro Revenge 3. I sold the system to a competitor of his for a better price than originally contracted to him, and last I knew he was now blacklisted from owning a company, as well as he lost his right to work as a lawyer. I only got that 5% he paid at the beginning, and for working for just over 5 months on this project that is hardly anything, but the knowledge of his demise will keep my heart warm for the rest of my life.